Welcome to Healing Together. I'm Nicholas Boileau. Today I'm talking with Elizabeth Schumacher and Dr. Aaron Friedman about their story as patient and doctor ever since Liz was a young teenager and needed a kidney transplant. Liz is an adult now and currently experiencing chronic kidney failure again. And we discuss her and Aaron's evolving relationship even as she grew up and left his pediatric practice. This conversation isn't only about pediatric patients growing up, which can lead to painful separations for both sides. It's really about how the doctor-patient relationship can be transformative for both the patient and the doctor. And when we go through medical relationships as if they were simply transactions, we lose out on valuable opportunities for our lives to intersect in a meaningful way. Our discussion reminded me to think differently about the doctors I consult for my own care, and I hope it does the same for you. So without further delay, I bring you Elizabeth Schumacher and Dr. Aaron Friedman. Well, welcome Liz Schumacher and Aaron Friedman. Why don't we start with a little bit about what you each do in life and where you are in the arc of your story together?
Liz, you should go first.
My name is Liz Schumacher. I'm a 35-year kidney patient. I've had 3 kidney transplants, and I'm currently experiencing chronic rejection with my 3rd transplant. And I own a medical association management company located in Chicago.
I'm Aaron Friedman. I was a pediatric nephrologist for just about 40 years. Pediatric nephrologist is someone who takes care of children with kidney disease, children and adolescents, I should say, with kidney disease. And indeed, I met Liz about the time that she was 14, 15 years old. We've had a doctor-patient relationship as well as a friend and even colleague relationship as she got older and I got older too. I also spent some time in administration, and I chaired pediatrics departments, and I was the dean of the medical school at the University of Minnesota before I retired, and I've been retired for about 6 years.
And Liz, how early was your first transplant?
First transplant, I was, 14 years old.
Can you say a little bit about what it means that you're experiencing chronic rejection now?
Chronic rejection is now quite a bit different than it was the last time I rejected a kidney 24 years ago. I'm working full time. I'm able to walk about 20 miles a week. I do strength training twice a week. So physically, I'm doing very well. I do get a little bit more tired. I do have certain side effects that I notice creep up here and there. But generally, I would say I'm functioning quite well. I would say equal to most colleagues in similar positions as me, regardless of my medical condition.
So you're superhuman.
I just persevere.
And so what does it mean medically that you're in rejection if you're functioning, I assume, as you normally would?
It just means using more care, listening to my body more, adapting daily things, might be diet, appetite, sleep, things like that, based upon how I'm feeling. Just prioritizing those things even more so that I'm taking care of myself.
And is your kidney functioning at full capacity?
No, it is not.
Is it measurable, what the difference? And do you experience a difference in how you feel?
I notice little things, subtle changes that I didn't feel maybe 5 years ago, but they're not major things to me. I think I experience it, and then I might run some of the side effects or things that I'm feeling past Aaron or my current transplant team, just to make sure it's not something unusual. And then I find a way to adapt to it and just keep moving.
Chronic rejection has an interesting picture to it because chronic is a crucial word there. This is a slowly progressive change. It's measurable, which is to say one can look at Liz's kidney function with blood tests and see that it is not quite normal. Her kidney function is pretty good, though, and the kidney is capable of making adaptations, generally by working a little harder, so that as Liz has described, most of what she's experiencing is either pretty mild or she's not experiencing anything at all. And Liz is someone who knows what chronic kidney disease and even acute kidney failure looks like because she's had that in the past. And I'm pretty confident that she doesn't have those symptoms, which are quite a bit more obvious today.
I remember my father had kidney disease, and this was in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. And he was regularly up at night with severe cramps. And even with the treatment, which he didn't get a new kidney, he did dialysis. It was pretty barbaric at that time. Are those some of the symptoms that Liz would or could experience?
I don't think that anybody would let Liz get that far, frankly. And dialysis in the 1970s and dialysis in the 2020s is very, very different. It was 1972 when Medicare was convinced, or at least the federal government was convinced, to make chronic kidney failure a disease that would be covered. And that allowed for dialysis in a much more extensive way, but it was very primitive compared to today.
Let's move into why we decided to make this podcast and have a conversation together, which is really about your relationship, which seems to have two phases. First, the relationship which you started when you, Aaron, were a pediatric nephrologist and taking care of Liz as her doctor. And then later, as Liz became an adult and left your practice, I assume, or left your care, you continued your doctor-patient, friend-friend relationship, and that has meant a lot. And when we had that conversation originally, we thought it was a really interesting conversation for people to hear about, or a relationship for people to hear about, because there's often so much distance between physicians and their patients. And sometimes that's real distance, and sometimes that's perceived distance. Can you talk a little bit about the two phases of your relationship and maybe help listeners understand how that evolution happened?
The first phase of our relationship started pretty quickly after I was diagnosed with kidney disease as a child. It became acute fairly quickly by the time I was introduced to Dr. Friedman. And at that point, really became his patient. And we went through a lot of different treatments and a lot of different options to try to make me well. So I tried a lot of different treatments and therapies to try and, I guess I would look at it and say, catch up with how quickly my body was getting sick. We would try all sorts of things, from tweaking medications to plasmapheresis to, dialysis, ultimately in a transplant. So Dr. Friedman was by my side through all of that and was my doctor until my mid-20s, when I had to leave the pediatric area at University of Wisconsin Medical School, University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics, and move over to the adult transplant clinic. Because Dr. Friedman and I went through a lot of acute, crazy situations together when I was young, we naturally bonded. He's like family to me, and the same with my family. Everyone knows who he is and his wife. And he is someone who's very much trusted by us and who we all consider part of our extended family, because we've known each other for so long. We've been through such intense situations together that you can't help but bond with people when those kinds of experiences occur. I've been fortunate as I've grown older to really be able to develop that relationship into something that is really quite special. I consider he and his wife amongst my closest friends, people that when I think about, during COVID, who do I want to do a Zoom call with and chit chat? They're always at the top of the list. I just really value the history we have and their personalities, and our connection isn't just because we've been through so much together medically. It's also because we really enjoy each other and have a lot of things in common.
Aaron, I really want to hear what you have to say about this, but I'm just wondering if you could give an example of when you said acute crazy situations you've been through together. What does something like that look like?
I'll give one and I'll let Aaron give one. I would say one was, I recall coming into the University of Wisconsin Hospital. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was with my mother and I couldn't even walk. I was so tired. I got into a wheelchair, had my labs drawn. I went to one of the clinic spaces and my hematocrit was, I think, a 10 or 11, and a normal is a 35 to 45. So I was severely anemic, and I don't know if I'd call that life-threatening anemic. I would let Dr. Friedman comment on that, but certainly was super anemic and started getting a lot of blood transfusions. So there was a lot of situations like that that came on really hard and really fast, where I really relied on Dr. Friedman's expertise to right the ship for me.
Why don't I weigh in on that one and give one other example? In fact, a hematocrit at 10 would be really life-threatening if it occurred in a day or two. That represents an acute bleed. One of the things about chronic kidney disease or acute kidney disease is that the kidney is responsible for telling the bone marrow to make more red blood cells. It actually produces a hormone that stimulates the production of red blood cells. And when you have chronic kidney disease, you don't have that hormone. So over time, your hematocrit keeps falling. And I think in Liz's case, there were a combination of things that came together to make it as low as 10. We don't usually let our patients get to 10. You feel pretty bad when you're there. So that is one example. If I could give one other, I remember being at home on a weekend and I was on call. And Liz won't remember this. That is, she won't have a memory of it. She may know the story. And she and her parents were up north in the northern part of Wisconsin. And she had a seizure. The parents, her mom called me. We actually had to arrange to get her down to Madison in a big hurry. And she had a seizure because her blood pressure went out of control. And she wound up in the intensive care unit for a number of days till we could get control of her blood pressure. And fortunately, we also prevented her from having more seizures. And then fortunately, all of that quieted down.
And a seizure looks like an epileptic seizure in this case, or is it different?
No, it looks like epilepsy.
Aaron, can you talk a little bit about how Liz described the relationship with you and its evolution?
I got to be Liz's doctor because I was on call. And she was assigned to me as a new patient. And that's just the luck of the draw, if you will. She could have been seeing somebody else, and there'd be somebody else who would be her caretaker. Secondly, distance is an issue for those of us who are specialists. Most of our patients come from someplace else. We don't bump into them going down the street shopping or at some movie theater or something like that, or at least it's unusual for us for that to happen. So that's another piece of the serendipity, if you will. Of course, in Liz's case, early on, we saw her a lot because of the severity of her illness and the rapidity with which it changed. Thirdly, I got to meet Liz as a young adult. She calls herself a child, but really she was a teenager and got to be her doctor as she was becoming an adult, which makes the ability to have some sort of relationship directly with the patient when you're a pediatrician different than if you're starting to see a 3-year-old, for example. Those were all parts of this. And I would say what made the biggest difference, though, is that Liz went to college here in the same town that I was working in. And she went to law school in the same town that I was working in. And so there were a variety of other opportunities, even when she was well and no longer my patient, for us to be able to be in contact with each other and do so easily. So I think a lot of things that make this relationship that we've had that's morphed from doctor-patient to friend and colleague relationship is also in many ways serendipitous.
As a retired physician, you continue to have this relationship and Liz continues to consult you. Does it remove some pressure to do this as a retired physician?
I think the pressure changes. I still get 5 different kidney journals online, and I still read them and look at those things that are of interest to me or are things that I knew in the past and just wonder what's changed. I think I would feel a lot different about this if I was really no longer aware of what was going on. And I have to tell Liz that. I have to say, this is past me now. I either don't understand it or don't know the medications that they're talking about and so forth. So I do feel that responsibility to be honest about where my knowledge is, which would have been true 20 years ago or 30 years ago when we first started seeing each other as a patient and a doctor. So that's if I feel anything, it's the idea that I really shouldn't be commenting on this. And I think Liz has heard me say that too. I don't get that one. And that means I don't understand what they're doing. It means I'm no longer versed.
But you still enjoy the chat and the consultation and being able to have input.
Yes, that is correct. And I think it reflects the fact that I liked my job.
What is it like in a situation where someone requires a lot of care to have this weird, unnatural, or what's to me an unnatural parting as you, Liz, I think you used the term graduate from pediatrics to regular adult care?
It's scary. I've gone through kind of these evolutions a few times. I remember when Aaron had the conversation with me in the pediatric clinic that he couldn't see me anymore because I had hit the age limit. And
God, it sounds like a breakup.
And it was really sad and hard for me because I thought, who can I trust? Who I have plenty of other people who take care of me in transplant, but that's different than him. At the time, it really wasn't. It was scary. It feels a little bit like you're putting on a blindfold and you're kind of moving into a new space. But I was confident in my abilities to ask questions. I didn't feel like, that was the end. I knew that, Aaron was still there and I could always reach out to him. I was really moving to another part of the same system that Aaron was in, the same hospital. So I knew that he could still see my records and he still had access to my information. So it didn't really feel like a parting where you're, getting up and leaving. It was, I'm just really moving from one area to another area. That was hard, but I think it all worked fine. I do feel like as things progressed, when I rejected my second kidney, I know my transplant team, talked to Aaron. I remember having conversations with him in the room along with the transplant team when I was getting treated for that rejection. So I always felt like there was a collaborative relationship among my healthcare team from a young age between pediatrics and transplantation, all the different areas. It kind of felt like a big extended family to me. So it was I knew he was still there. It was just that it was a different team that was going to be really handling me more moving ahead. As an adult, that's continued. Now that I'm going through this issue, a lot of my healthcare team from when I was younger, including some of my old transplant team, have retired. So I'm still in contact with a few of those people like Aaron, who have retired or went elsewhere, who've known me all my life. With my current team, it was a little scary for me when I started rejecting this kidney because I didn't know these doctors. I had been so stable for 20 plus years that I didn't really need a lot of care. So when I started going through rejection, I really got to know the new team better. And it took a little while to build trust after you've been with the same team for, 20 some years of your life. But it was part of the natural progression. It's something that I accept. And it's just like building new relationships all over again. It's a little scary going from a team that you've known for over 20 years, 30 years, to a brand new team. But the new team brings different insights and feedback. And it is very different being a patient now who's doing really well and is stable that has been a change. When I've rejected my kidneys in the past, it's always been, when I had kidney disease as a kid, I felt much more acute. Now it's research is advanced and the treatments are better. So I'm able to be stable and not see them a ton. I really can be on my own and follow the directions and the medications. And there are other people who are much sicker than me who require a lot more of their time. So it's been a progression, but it's something that I've evolved along with.
So for those of us who are pediatric specialists or pediatricians in general, it's a bittersweet moment to have to say to a patient, it's not wise for you to continue to have me as your doctor. And if I could just put a little context around that, the bittersweet part is one, it is sad to, especially for somebody that you've had a long-term relationship with, it is sad to have to say, I can't continue to be your doctor. By the same token, it's a success. It's our job to get our patients into adulthood. And that when that happens, we have to view it that way. Secondly, as people get older, things that may happen to them are outside of our purview and frankly, outside of our knowledge. So I haven't had to take care of kidney patients because they lost their kidney function from diabetes. That doesn't happen in childhood. It's the most common cause of kidney failure in adults in the United States, but it's not for us. That's just one example. I didn't take care of children who had an acute myocardial infarction. So as you get into adulthood, and I'm not wishing any of this on Liz, obviously, but we have to recognize that we don't really have the background that internal medicine doctors have. And we tell that to the patients.
Are there ways in which you would invite patients to keep in touch later in life so you would know how they're doing?
I'd certainly like that. I have to admit I haven't invited it, and that's a good question. It's happened, and I'll get letters or pictures. I've gotten the picture of the child of a patient that I followed. I've gotten graduation pictures and letters that I just thought of you. It's 10 years later. I just thought of you, but so here's where I am now, and so forth. And it's a great feeling, of course. It's a wonderful feeling.
And it is an actual relationship, not just a transaction.
Well, you've raised a really interesting point. I remember as this was an odd situation, but I remember seeing a patient with my transplant surgeon colleague at the time that he was being discharged from the hospital post-transplant. And the transplant surgeon said, "Boy, you look really good. Glad to see you're ready to go home," and so forth. And the patient said to him, "Well, you get paid for this. I better look good." That's a transaction. And I think that it's not a success when that happens. I don't know where that came from with this particular patient, but and so yes, there is a personal component to taking care of patients over time. It is one of the differences that those of us who, especially those of us who care for patients who have chronic conditions, it is one of the differences compared to being an emergency room doctor or somebody who is unlikely to see most of their patients a second time. The difference is we're very likely to see most of our patients, not just the second time, but many times over.
Yeah, it's odd that we have an idea that this is a transactional relationship in any way, especially when the paycheck is often secondary to some of the other rewards of the work that we do. And I imagine people go into medicine not just because of the paycheck, but because of the human interaction and the meaningfulness of helping people through difficulty in their lives.
There's no question that that's true. And in fact, we used to say regularly that, especially for pediatricians and family practice docs and psychiatrists who are at the low end of the pay scale when it comes to docs in the United States. And don't get me wrong, that's not terrible. It's just that it's a different level than some others. But I don't think it matters whether you're a neurosurgeon or a cardiac surgeon or a pediatric nephrologist. There is a relationship part to this. And for the vast majority of doctors, it makes a big difference.
And Aaron, hearing how rewarding that is, you're continuing to get a lot out of giving, even during your retirement. I imagine there's an unmet need for all of us who are patients that, boy, it would be great to have more than the 15 minutes an appointment that I get from my doctor. So there's a need for more care. And Liz, you know a lot about healthcare. Is there a role for retired physicians to be helpful without being your doctor specifically?
I think it's a great question. I was just working on a client's strategic plan yesterday and developing tactics out. And one of the questions was how to engage volunteers for a longer period, creating opportunities for within, let's say, a medical association's had, a physician who served as the chair of the advocacy committee, and they're 10 years up and they're retiring, et cetera, but they want to continue on and be meaningful in some way. I was just thinking about this yesterday, creating unique opportunities for them to be able to sit at the table, to develop policy, to be able to, help patient organizations, to be able to use that, not just the medical experience, but also that wisdom and the seasoning of somebody who's been around a long time to really improve society. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And something that I think about every day professionally with my clients is how to engage people after, they've finished a volunteer role or after they've retired, because they do have so much expertise and sometimes more time to devote. And I often find some of the volunteers I work with, we just took a new client and the executive committee is retired physicians. And they're just a delight to work with because they have so much substantive knowledge, but they also, of course, they have a little more time to give. But what I really like the most is their wisdom in being able to prioritize what's really important to focus on and what isn't, and really kind of focusing on the big picture of things to solve real problems rather than little things. And I think that only comes with, I shouldn't say it only comes, but I think it often comes with experience and knowledge and confidence. And people like Aaron, obviously have all of those things from being in practice for so long and dealing with so many problems, just like experience in any profession. So I think there is a role. There's a lot of roles, in fact.
So your question raises a tricky issue, and that is Liz and I and her family and I we did not have a conversation in the past about the boundaries of this relationship. And I think in part, I don't think either of us felt as if we had exceeded some boundary in some way. And I think we were pretty confident that either of us would also tell the other, no, that's out of bounds. I really can't go there. But that too is to some degree lucky, which is to say, I think one of the things that, to get at your question, one of the things that many retired doctors used to worry about a lot was that boundary. And, can I actually retire? Or if I do remain involved, will I continue to be somebody's doctor, not just somebody's sounding board?
I do think it's a really interesting conversation around boundaries. And I do think if we didn't have that kind of a relationship, I think one thing we didn't touch on that I do think plays a role is having those kinds of relationships. It does help a patient take care of themselves better. It does give patients more confidence. It's like wondering, hey, I'm kind of feeling this and this and this. Does this seem right or not? And just having a sounding board of someone to listen and say, yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of like a teacher reinforcing. You're onto the right thing. You're onto the right thing. And I think that does help patients be advocates for themselves. So I wish more people had a relationship like I'm fortunate to have with Aaron. And I would say to an extent, my transplant surgeon too. I don't talk to or see as much, but recently chatted with him a little bit, or with his wife actually, who I'm also friends with. And I said, I haven't talked to him a lot. I know he's kind of been retiring. And I said, I'm trying to give him space. She said, why? He misses his patients. So I don't think it's so unique. I think it's a really good thing. So that's where I'd leave it.
I'd like to shift gears, Liz, and talk about what it's like as a transplant recipient to go through this period in time. We haven't talked about the pandemic at all, but here we are living through it. And here you are with some really special conditions in your life that you have to pay attention to. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, when all of this started kind of hitting the surface in March of 2020, it was quite scary for me. Obviously, I'm very immunocompromised. And so I'm somebody who can get viruses and bugs and get sick very easily.
And you're immunocompromised because you're on certain medications?
Yes, I'm on medications for my kidney transplant. They're called immunosuppressant medications. So I'm on a lot of medicines to really control my immune system so that we're tricking my kidney into thinking that the kidney is really my own. So the way we do that is through medications that I take that keep all of my numbers controlled. I sort of say I was explaining this to my employees, it's like a stereo. So my immune system, as to think of my immune system like a stereo, when it gets really loud, we have to turn it down. So the way we do that is with these medications, and we tinker with the meds so that we take that volume down and we're not blasting it. We're controlling it. So that's what we do really with the medications is control that immune system, keep it quiet so that it's doing its job and it's not creating reactions to something foreign in my body.
So the same immune system that is controlled not to reject your kidney is also the immune system that would protect you against viruses that run through, that you might get from touching the wrong thing or from being exposed to someone who's got a little bug.
Yes, my whole immune system is carefully controlled to make sure that my kidney continues to work as it should and doesn't start creating immunity and rejecting my organ. But as a result, one of the side effects of that, of course, is my whole body is more immune to things, skin cancers and different kinds of diseases and things like that, and viruses.
It's less immune to those things.
She's more susceptible to those things, is probably the term.
Susceptible, exactly. So yeah, when things happened with COVID, it was pretty scary for me because I knew I would probably be somebody who would be at higher risk of being able to get it, just like getting the flu or whatever kind of virus. And then the next question to me was, well, how serious is this if I got it? What is it like compared to the flu or some other virus? And of course, not having a lot of information, my approach would be to be super conservative. And we don't have data. We don't have a lot of information. It was sort of my thought at the time about what this can do acutely or long-term. So my husband and I made a choice pretty early on to really put ourselves on lockdown and really avoid exposure to other people. Wear N95 masks if I have to, even go through the drive-thru at Walgreens to get my medications. I haven't set foot in my father's house since March because I don't want to put him at risk as an elderly person, and I don't want to put myself at risk. So we've been very, very careful. It is something that is scary to me. I've actually written some things about it because the first reaction I really had was early on, and in the most basic terms, was this is going to be like survival of the fittest. So if I look at where I'm at on the food chain, when we look at Earth, I'm somebody who's going to be at more risk than other people. So like an elderly person, or somebody who has severe medical issues, which I do. So even though I feel great on a day-to-day basis and my kidney disease is being managed, I'm still immunocompromised. So I use a lot of care And I'm very careful, and I apply the same standard to those around me. Just because I'm immunocompromised, I don't assume people around me couldn't get it. One of the first things I did was, I own my own business. I closed the office. I asked Dr. Friedman, Aaron, if he would do a call with my employees just to share some, very high level knowledge of what we know about COVID and what they could be doing to be safe, because I felt a duty to share with my employees some medical information around what this is, instead of watching the news or wherever people might get their information. I wanted to get good information to them. And then we made a decision to close our office and to really work remotely. So we really did that, not just for myself, but really for my employees too. I didn't want to be any part of putting people at risk, making people come into an office and go home and potentially expose their parents or, family members who have cancer or grandparents.
Do you think that having gone through really serious medical difficulties at a young age has made you better prepared for not just the risks that come as we grow older, but also for a situation like this, where a lot of us are really experiencing health risk as as an undercurrent of daily life for the first time?
I think my medical illness, it was with me during my formative years. So it definitely that's a whole other conversation, I'd say, and how it's affected how I view life. And I'm much more comfortable taking risk. I know what risk I'm comfortable with and what risk I'm not. I think I've become really entrepreneurial, because the kind of risk, when I thought about starting my own business, I thought, well, that's not a lot of risk. For some people, it would seem like a lot of risk. And then I'll think, well, that's nothing compared to what I've been through. So there's certain risks I'm really comfortable with, and there are other risks I'm not. And I would say unnecessary medical risks. It isn't important to me to be able to walk into Target and go shopping without a mask on. It isn't important to me to go to Target to shop at all. So that's not a risk I'm willing to take right now.
You're comfortable knowing what risks you're willing to take and not, and you seem to be also comfortable with there being risks in general. And I'm reminded of a very intense workshop I took once with a retired general who, at some point I said, "Doesn't this make you nervous?" I forget what the task was. And he said, "Well, when no one's shooting at me, I'm not really nervous." It helped me understand that his perspective on at-risk situations was completely different than mine. And it sounds like yours, because you've been at risk for so long, there's a level of calmness. Is there also an accompanying level of alertness to anything you might be experiencing that's different? Like, could there be almost a type of PTSD where if you have a sniffle or a cough or a headache, you might be asking yourself questions that most of us aren't asking ourselves?
Oh, for sure. I didn't really think about PTSD until I got older, and I started learning more about, the things that people experience after having traumatic events in their lives. So certainly this was traumatic stuff, but I had a wonderful family and friends and people like Aaron who took care of me. I always felt safe. I've never thought once in my life I would ever die. So I owe a lot of that to Aaron, and just even listening to how he's speaking today, his calm, the way he handles things, that has made a massive difference in my life and feeling like everything is going to be okay. So as far as being attuned to things, I'm really attuned to little things. Aaron knows that, because I'll text him and say, "Hey, I've had 3 days of headaches," or "My GI's acting up," or whatever it might be. And I'm only raising this because it's happening for a week, or it doesn't seem normal. So it's things that might seem like everyday things to a lot of people, but I notice and I start paying attention if they continue and persist. So those are certainly things that I notice quite a bit more than other things. Sometimes I'm definitely overreacting. Sometimes I'm not. But I just always think it doesn't hurt to raise the question. I'll email my transplant coordinator and say, "Hey, I'm experiencing this and this and this. It's just something different. Is it anything to be concerned about?" So I do ask more questions and pay attention to little things. As my husband likes to remind me, though, we are getting older. I'm almost 50 years old. So some of these things are normal for somebody who's also aging.
So Nick, could I weigh in?
Weigh in. But I just want to say, for anyone who won't be seeing this on video, which is everyone, because this is an audio podcast. It's remarkable to have you say that and also talk about what's going on with your current situation and look as incredibly strong and healthy and vibrant as you do.
My transplant surgeon said to me once, I started my career after law school working in the university hospital where I was a patient, and I'd run into him and Aaron in the elevator, and he's a German guy. And he would look at me and say, Lizzie, you look really pale. You need to eat a steak a week. And then recently, I don't know, a few years ago, I saw him. I had dinner with him and his wife, where he told me it was okay to call him. I always called him Dr. So-and-so. And he said, you really can call me by my first name. But he said to me, I got to tell you, these medications that we put you on, you seem to be looking better as you get older. I need to take these medications.
So if I can make 3 points. First, this point about how Liz looks versus what her underlying condition and her medications could create is a really interesting point, and a point that she touched on, which is to say, I think that because if Liz is walking down the street, nobody says, "Oh, there goes a 3-time transplant patient." It is important for others in the situation, for example, like her office, to understand that she's actually not the same as a nearly 50-year-old who looks younger. And so, secondly, I think Liz, more than a lot of Americans in general, understands the notion of risk, not just what her own risks are. This is an important issue today, because I think people have confused risk with the comment that, oh, I don't know anybody who's had COVID, and doesn't get this idea of what risk actually means and how it could impact your individual health. Thirdly, as a transplant patient, and in particular as somebody who's gone through the evolution to a large extent of transplant. The first transplants in the United States were over 50 years ago, but transplant, especially in children, didn't really get going until the 1970s. And so Liz has been through transplantation, through most of its life, if you will, in the United States. And it has evolved tremendously. The word I think Liz was looking for is modulation. It's the responsibility of Liz and her doctors to find that line between keeping her immune system from rejecting her kidney and allowing her to live inside a world where she could get bacteria, viruses, fungus, those sorts of things, and still make it out. She's had colds. She's had viruses attack her and make her ill while she was on these immunosuppressants, and she's gotten through them. It's been okay. And the difference with COVID versus most of those others is the severity of the illness, and so she gets that risk, and she gets that difference. So as a transplant patient, and Liz and I had these conversations, people are learning more and more now. Today, it's possible to look back over 6 or 7 months and say, so what's actually happened to transplant patients who've gotten COVID? And we've learned that the risk is there. It's not as bad as folks thought, meaning that it isn't, if you get COVID and you're a transplant patient, it isn't a sentence. It's lots and lots of patients get better, but it doesn't mean you should get it.
Right, and that's what I want to be careful of. So from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are 2 reasons to think about this, or many reasons, but among which I would put 2 at the top. One is that what we're learning about COVID is still evolving as people who have had COVID are experiencing after effects that haven't yet been fully documented or understood. And the second thing is that the notion of it's not that bad, quote unquote, which is not something you said, but it's something that's tossed about in our national dialogue is utterly compassionless when it comes to so much of our population who is at risk, whether they're chronically ill or whether they're older or whether they're very young. It's unconscionable to have that attitude, especially as a country that can afford to care for its people. It would be a different thing if we were struggling to put bread on the table of every citizen every day. But we're in a position where we can actually care for each other a lot better than.
Right. It's dangerous and unconscionable. You're absolutely correct. And one of the things that's crucial, and you made the point, Liz has made the point also, and that is that when you have something novel, and that word is used all the time about this virus, you can't expect what you thought was true 3 weeks into the pandemic to be true 7 or 8 months after it started. And there is a learning curve, and the idea that you should have been smart enough to know everything then that you know now is also unconscionable.
So I think you're saying, A, it's perfectly okay and normal that you didn't know what you know now then, and B, pay attention to what you know now and don't ignore it. Don't ignore the learnings as they come out.
That's precisely correct.
Okay. Let's just a last question. I know we're pushing time, but can we just comment on, Liz, where you are now and what you can look forward to given your current condition? It's pretty scary to hear you're in a state of chronic rejection. What happens next?
When I was told I had chronic rejection, I was, of course, it transported me back to when I was a kid and what it looked like then. And as Dr. Friedman talked about earlier, the acute problems I had when I was younger are dramatically different. The way we managed the acute problems when I was younger, dramatically different than now 30 years later. So my first reactions, when my transplant nephrologist did a biopsy and said that my rejection was quite impressive, and he looked at me and said, "I can't believe you're doing as good as you are." And I've stayed the same pretty much for over 2 years now, a little over 2 years since that was diagnosed, which is great. It's been a relearning for me of what it looks like to have chronic rejection now versus what it looked like times before. And going back to what we were saying about COVID, it's a testament to time and how you learn more over time. What we know now about treating rejection and transplantation is different than 20 years ago. So I'm very optimistic because my life hasn't changed dramatically. I've made adjustments to care for myself more, just so that I can be, using what I think of as like preventive medicine with myself, things that I can do to stay strong and healthy and adapt. I'm really not too scared. This kidney, when it's time to go, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or whatever it's going to be, I'll deal with it. It's not something I haven't been through before. I'm used to it now, and I have faith in research and medicine, and I think everything will be managed fine. I have people who are wanting to get tested to give me another kidney, and people do get excited about being a hero for you and donating an organ. I've been down that road as well. And I just said, hey, we're not at that point yet. When the time arrives, we'll let you know. So I feel pretty optimistic. I feel like I know what I need to do to take care of myself. I feel like I have great family and friends, of which I include Aaron, part of my family and friend circle, and doctors to help me get through that. So I feel like I'm doing the best I can do. I also feel really fortunate that I have my own business. I have the ability to work from home. I have the ability to turn up the volume on work or turn it down based on how I feel. So those are all good. Those are all really good things that help kind of set the stage for me as things progress.
Liz's kidney function is nowhere near requiring something to be done anytime soon. Also, one of the things that she pointed out, which is really true, is not only have we progressed in the knowledge of how chronic rejection acts, the armamentarium has changed dramatically. And Liz experienced some of that when chronic rejection was diagnosed on her biopsy. She had a treatment that would not have been possible because it didn't exist when she was treated the last time for chronic rejection. And in many ways, that's another thing that she has going for her, which is that's not a static field. There's a lot more that's being learned all the time. Getting as long as you can get out of a functioning kidney is a real advantage, not only in terms of not having to have something else done with respect to, say, another transplant, but also in fully expecting that there'll be other things coming down the pike. And that's been true for this field ever since it entered the scene.
Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing so much about this wonderful relationship.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Nick.
See you soon.
All right. See you soon. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Healing Together is produced by Health and Me. Our theme song is Ramble, composed and performed by Ed Morneau.